So our next show up is a wonderful and strangely bizarre musical called Kiss of the Spider Woman. It's a show that I've been intrigued about for quite some time. I was first exposed to that material way back when there was a movie version made of the book. And it was starring an actor that was getting more and more intriguing and interesting press by the name of William Hurt. The interesting thing with this was that the film didn't really get wide distribution. It was almost like an independent film back in the days when there weren't any independent films. And at that time, I made it one of my goals to try to see every single Oscar award-winning performance that I could. That only lasted a couple of years for me. I quickly outgrew that. But in this particular case, I remember having to travel in order to see this movie. And when I saw it, I was absolutely fascinated with it. Mainly because of the storyline. It's set in a prison. The book itself is in an Argentinian prison. The musical is in kind of a South American prison. But what's intriguing is that it's a very, very intimate story between this guy who's a revolutionary person, and he's thrown in jail for clearly political reasons. And then this other guy, and by the way, that guy's name is Valentin. And then there's another guy called Molina, who is also put in jail for political reasons, but he's accused of molesting a male minor. So you have this fairly innocent, almost political prisoner with a relatively volatile prisoner. A lot of shows, a lot of musicals are based on the principle of an odd couple. This is a real odd couple. What makes the movie fairly intriguing and what makes the musical absolutely fascinating is that our gay gentleman, Molina, in order to cope with the struggles of the prison, has these fantasies. And mostly they center around his favorite actress, a lady by the name of Aurora, and if you just think of Chita Rivera, that will help. And every time he's in a pressure-filled situation, he thinks about Aurora, and Aurora comes in and has a huge, splashing, Hollywood-esque dance number that blows apart the prison walls, allows an opportunity for a big song and dance, and then the song is over, and bang, you go right back into that intimate prison. That juxtaposition, that yin and yang, that kind of joyous counterpoint to real deprivation is a fascinating thing. The other thing is it's not that well known, but it's written by Kander and Ebb, who are infamously famous for writing a couple of other shows that everyone has heard of, namely Cabaret and Chicago. This is a lot more cabaret, but even on the darker side. Also, this work was later in their career, and they started dealing with more politically sensitive kinds of issues. And even though this sounds like a prison drama, it's really a love story in many, many ways. Later on, Kander and Ebb will also produce, even though one of them will have passed away by then, a show called The Scottsboro Boys, which also dealt with fairly interesting political issues. It's fascinating, and I think the students are having just a wonderful time with this. We've got, again, what's interesting with MSU Mankato is that our casting pool is so deep, and so we have some people that if you've been a patron of our theater, you've seen them over and over and over again, and some are making their leading debuts. And we always have that mix. Even in Les Mis, we have 4 freshmen in that show. So in this show, there are 3 principal characters. We, of course, have the Spider-Woman. That's Caitlin Dahlquist. Caitlin is most famous around here for playing the role of Christine in Phantom of the Opera. This is not an operatic role, and interestingly, in Phantom, she didn't get to dance at all. In this one, it's all about the dance, and she gets to dance, and she is an honest-to-God triple threader, and she can spin webs too, so she's a quadruple threader, I suppose. So Caitlin is our female star. Our leading gentleman, the role of Molina, is played by Sam Stahl. Sam made his first big splash in a show called Rent. He was one of the leads in Les Mis. By the way, Caitlin was also one of the leads in Les Mis. Sam was Marius. Caitlin was Fantine. And so we have these stars of ours. Sam was also in the male lead in Legally Blonde and several other shows. And he is magnificent. The only problem with him is that he is one of our best dancers, but Molina doesn't get to dance. He just fantasizes about dancing and then watches other people, and it drives Sam crazy. He's sitting in the cell room, bouncing up and down, and he gets to do a couple of moves, so that's kind of fun. we're very excited about Jordan Oxborough. Jordan plays Valentine, the other prisoner. Now, Jordan has been in a whole bunch of shows. He was in Spring Awakening, for example. He was in Les Mis. Most of our guys were in Les Mis. And in this role, he gets to sing solo work. And he brings a magnificent presence to this. He's got a beautiful high voice, and this counterpoint between he and Sam are very good. They're both very experienced actors, even though Jordan hasn't been seen as much on our stage because he's a transfer student, and so that's always exciting. And so those are the three. There are a couple of other roles. For example, there's a warden who's in charge of the prison. That's Reggie Haney, who most recently was starring as the one male in Crumbs from the Table of Joy. Of course, I remember him as my King Arthur in Spamalot, and Reggie gets to kind of lord over this prison, which is fascinating. Reggie is a third-year MFA actor, so he's a senior. But then we have a couple of females, one of whom is a freshman. Mikhail Shapiro is a freshman who made her debut in Les Mis. She's currently the lead of our children's theater tour, so she's playing Alice, desperately trying to get either to and or from Wonderland, depending on when it is in the show. And and she plays the love interest of Valentine, even though she doesn't really have a speaking scene with him. Valentine imagines his girlfriend the same way that Melina imagines Aurora, and so she's playing that role. And then also we have a brand new transfer student, Carolyn Strauss, who plays Melina's girlfriend, and it's of course his mother. There's one of my favorite songs in the whole show is called Dear One, and it's the two guys sitting on their beds, and they're both thinking about, one is thinking about his lover, the other one is thinking about his mother, and they all come and sing together in a very theatrical way. Matter of fact, the movie I thought was kind of odd because it was so theatrical. As a theater piece, it works really, really well. And actually, the author himself adapted, there was a play version of this too that he adapted, but it just works beautifully as a musical. I just got an email and somebody said, why are you always doing serious, mature musicals? And my response is, Legally Blonde, Spamalot, Grand Night for Singing, Drowsy Chaperone. But this one, similar to Les Mis, is definitely for an older audience, a more mature audience. I think it's very evocative. This is the kind of show, I love this kind of show, because after the show is over, you cannot help but talk about it. You have to. It's too evocative. It's too intriguing to not sit down and talk. I'm sure some people talk about Legally Blonde, but mostly it would be, how much pink do you have in your wardrobe? There's not a lot of pink in this particular wardrobe, and again this juxtaposition of some very funny, frivolous, silly kinds of things, and then literally death and torture. Because this is a South American prison, probably not unlike Guantanamo, and there is torture and there is death, and very, very serious topics couched in this interesting piece of musical theater. One of the things that's always interesting with MSU main stage is that often faculty will get to work with faculty, and then sometimes you get to introduce students with a larger production and with bigger production values, and frankly more production money. So our lighting designer is Steve Smith. Steve and I have been working, and he's our faculty lighting designer. And this show, as you can imagine, going from prison to Hollywood, they don't really go to Hollywood, but they go to these fantasy sequences. It's quite spectacular. But what's really fun with this show is we have an MFA student who's writing a thesis about this show, but he's our set designer, and so he researched prisons, South American prisons, and that was very interesting when he presented that to the design team. And some of that is very much inspired by what it is that we see on the stage. And so that's Noah Files is our designer, and we also chose. I very much wanted to do this show in the Andreas Theater rather than the Ted Paul. Part of that has to do with aesthetic distance. When I saw the show, I got a chance to see the Broadway touring company of the show, and it was in a big theater, and you weren't that close to it, and so when people were tortured, you could kind of avert your eyes. In the Andreas, you can't avert your eyes. The actors are almost sitting in your lap, And I think that's part of the impact of the show. But there's also this metaphysical quality. And so the other thing that's interesting in the Andreas is that when we play the Andreas side to side, it's actually wider than the Ted Paul. It's a 70-foot expanse. And if you play it up and down, it's taller than the Ted Paul. And so what Noah has constructed are staircases that travel up. Some of you might have seen my production of Urinetown. We use somewhat of the same idea. But we're using above and below and sides, so it's very spectacular, even though the vast majority of the show is a two-person scene, the two guys in their cell, and then occasionally a woman will drift in and drift out through magical means. And so our costume designer is Allie Bowman. Allie is an undergraduate BFA design technology person. I wouldn't say her specialty is costumes. She's actually a kind of designer that does all kinds of things. She was my set designer for Spring Awakening. She's designed other kinds of shows, and right now we're working on Drowsy Chaperones, so she's really hit it big. We love to exploit talent, and whether the talent is at the graduate level or at the undergraduate level, Allie's a perfect example of an undergrad just getting right up to the top of the food chain, if you will, in order to do this. Well, she's designing these costumes, and the prison costumes are not so interesting. I don't know how many costumes Aurora wears, but we had our what we call our costume parade, and the guys wore a couple costumes, and Caitlin, our Aurora, kept on changing, and I think she has 25 costumes. It's a huge number of costumes, and they're just spectacular and great fun, because of course every time she appears, she's in a different movie. One of our we have a second-year MFA student, Anna Alex, who will be doing our sound design, and everybody is on mic for this show. We'll have a live orchestra, except you won't see them. The orchestra is actually going to be tucked behind in the scene shop. That way we can control the sound balance. And the Andreas Theater is a tricky theater as far as sound is concerned. The Ted Paul is a much more traditional, standard kind of thing, and so Anna's doing all kinds of intriguing things with balancing that sound, and then there are all kinds of sound effects. For example, people are screaming a lot. There's a lot of torture that goes on in this prison, and some of it actually happens on stage, warning, but a lot of it is just occasionally people will be screaming, and it sounds real. And of course it is real, but it's recorded coming from I don't know how many speakers we have. And so the student designers, I think, have done a fantastic job, and the student actors always, of course, do a job as well. Lastly, of course, whenever you do a musical, two critical members of the team are the co-directors, right? As the director, I serve as kind of the artistic coordinator of all of it, but we have both a musical director and a dance director that we call a choreographer. Evan Collins is our musical director. Evan is a wonderful musician in his own right, and I first became really aware of his talents when we were working on a show called Altar Boys, and then he was our musical director for Spring Awakening, which has to be one of my favorite shows of the century, if not of my MSU career here. A beautiful show, and matter of fact, we're resurrecting a scene from it. It's been selected to make a singular appearance at the Kennedy Center American College Theater Festival. We're actually bringing a scene, so we're resurrecting that right now. And so Evan has got those guys whipped into shape, and the gals, as well as our musical director. He'll also be the conductor of this live orchestra that will be sequestered backstage. And then our choreographer is Jacqueline Jula. Jacqueline is a senior BFA musical theater person, a wonderful dancer, actress in her own right. You saw her probably in Les Mis, because almost everybody who would be watching this probably saw Les Mis, and she played Madame Thénardier and brought the house down. She's also very fun. She was my choreographer for Spamalot as well, and so she has these guys. Sometimes they're marching as if they're in prison, and sometimes they're dancing as if they're a whole bunch of chorus boys. And so Jacqueline has done a great job. So Jacqueline and Evan join me in presenting this show that I know will be evocative. It might be a little controversial, and that's okay. Because if it's a type of show that you might think that you might be offended by, come see Drowsy Chaperone, and you will love that. If you're interested in evocative theater, come and see it, and you'll hear hints of cabaret, hints of Chicago, and something entirely new.